I'm so excited for today's interview. I have taped this is my third interview today, and I feel like someone just injected me with all the endorphins because Jessica Lahey is on the podcast today. She wrote The Gift of Failure, and I devoured this book. I loved every page. I was like, do I ear this? Do I highlight this? I'm screenshotting it, sending it to Chris. Poor guy's like, she's got to think I'm a horrible parent. Anyways, everything you wrote in the book is magic. I can't recommend it enough. If I were to pick like 3 books, parenting books for people to read, it's up there for me. Like, it is your everything guide to stop overparenting, to get your kids used to failure, to enjoy their sports instead of trying to be the coach or the ref, to let them be independent. I mean, it's just, I have full body chills. I'm so excited you're here. I'm like fangirling.
Oh, I'm so pleased. It just makes me so happy. Like a lot, like so many writers, we're alone and we're sitting there in our little office and it's, I'm writing these things and then suddenly they're out there in the world. And so it's an incredible dream to me that I'm helpful and that I can, honestly just translate the geeky knowledge that I get through like reading all the studies and reading all the books about the things and then translating that for people who don't necessarily want to dive into all of the studies and do all the research for a couple of years. So that means so much to me.
Oh, you did such a great job translating the literature and motivating a parent, me, to really think about my own childhood and what I think my parents did so well. And what I want to emulate. Because a lot of times I think we look back at our parents and we go, oh, well, I'm not going to do it like that. I wouldn't do that. I'm never going to do that. Like a Zest bar in the mouth. That was fun. I had that one.
I never had that, but I did have, my parents got a lot wrong. I mean, so my second book actually is about preventing substance use in kids. And I was raised in a home with, with an alcoholic parent. But on the other hand, they did a lot right. And honestly, the things they did right, are things that we can all emulate, which is they loved me ferociously and they trusted me. And those 2 things, I think, go a long way toward helping kids just sort of feel good about themselves and learn how to trust themselves. And so, yeah, it's been really interesting to watch also their response to the things I talk about in my work life and in the books, especially in the second book, which is, like I said, about preventing substance use in kids. But I have this incredibly cool job, which is to get curious about a topic. And in the case of The Gift of Failure, it was like, what is the overparenting thing doing to my students, because I was a middle school teacher at the time, and my own kids, because I was making the same mistakes as my students' parents were, and then doing all the research and translating it. And same thing about the substance use prevention. It's a pretty fun job getting to get curious about things, learn a lot about them, and then translate that research for other people.
Well, you are a gift and your books are a gift. And I think we have a lot, we didn't touch on this, but we do have a lot sort of in common. My dad is a recovering alcoholic and stopped drinking when I was 5. So I got really lucky with the timing of his sobriety. Through it was when my youngest sister was born. So there are 3 girls in my family. And I don't know what my future would have looked like if he had spent a lot of time drinking like he was prior to that. And I feel really blessed, but my grandmother died of alcohol and pill overdose, his mom, and it's definitely runs in my family. And so there's a lot to unpack today. Mostly we'll stick with The Gift of Failure.
We'll have a whole other conversation about that stuff. But my parents in recovery now too, got into recovery after me. But the wonderful thing about having kids grow up and find out about other people's experiences and go out into the world and find out not just, how they were raised, but they have something to compare it to. I've had my kids come back to me and just thank me for getting sober when they were young enough that it wasn't, it hadn't really impacted their lives yet. And so that's that incredible gift of like having this long-term view of parenting, like someday they'll understand. And, and then they get out there and they start to compare experiences with other kids. And it's been fascinating to sort of get through to the other side of this. But yeah, we'll have that whole other conversation about the substance use prevention, I'm sure, some other time.
Well, yeah, we'll get to the end of this podcast. Maybe you can drop a few like
sure
tricks of like distill it down into the elevator pitch, but let's start with
as it turns out though, what's funny is the books dovetail really well. So I'll be sure to like, as soon as I notice that dovetail point, I'll dump some information on you. There you go.
You're the pro. Okay. So you sort of teased it or like mentioned it. Talk to me about your background, your first career. What were you doing? Who were you teaching? Tell us all about it.
Yeah, the teaching thing, actually, I'm one of those people who has done a lot of meandering in my professional life. And I actually have been to law school, was going to work in juvenile court, and have done a whole bunch of other things. But I landed on teaching actually while I was still in law school, completely fell in love with it, have taught every grade from 6th to 12th. I happen to love middle school the best. I love middle school. I spent 5 years teaching in a drug and alcohol rehab for adolescents. And so there's something really amazing about teaching middle school. There's also something really amazing about teaching kids who have been negatively impacted by really low expectations of them. And that I love too. But yeah, so I was teaching middle school and starting to see that my students were super afraid to make mistakes. Like rough drafts freaked them out because the word rough is in there. It's not perfect. I was getting a lot of feedback from parents, and they were getting a lot of feedback from their parents, which was around like, getting rid of any consequences, not having any follow through on, no, really, this is a consequence that's going to be really important for them, and they'll learn something from it. And I was on this super high horse with the parents of my students. Like I was starting to get a little miffed, like all these amazing learning opportunities would disappear because consequences, they would come in and rescue and deliver the homework to school on a day when the homework was left behind. And just as I'm working with the student on like some strategy for how to not forget the homework next time, the parent would run in with the homework, and suddenly the kid is like, well, that's my strategy, the strategy that's going to work forever. My mom is going to bring my homework to college for me, I'm sure. But like I said, I was on this super high horse, and I was doing the same thing to my own kids. So the more I learned the more I sort of realized that I was doing the same thing and that I was negatively impacting my kids' development. I got really curious about the impact that overparenting or helicopter parenting or directive parenting, whatever you want to call it, has on learning, the impact it has on motivation, and the impact that the different kind of ways we try to motivate kids, the impact that has on their motivation and creativity. And so that's really what the gift of failure is about, that the things we do because we're trying to make life a little easier for our kids, we're trying to clear the path for what we think is like room to learn and room to become, some of that actually is having a very negative impact on their learning and their ability to become competent during especially their teenage years and into their early adulthood, which freaked me out. So I had to find, because like I said, I was doing the same thing to my own kids. So I had to find some solutions for that. And so that's where this whole book came from.
So you were teaching, you were parenting, and you saw all the parents snow plowing for their children, fixing
very much so
problems, saving the day, being the best parent ever.
Yeah, it was just, and I was worried. And a student told me, that she was no longer interested in the learning. She was more interested in what her grade was going to be. And there was just this sense that I had one parent tell me one time that they would be handpicking their daughter's teachers in high school to avoid the teachers that they thought would rub her the wrong way. And I'm like, oh no, what is happening? This is going all off the rails. So yeah, that was sort of the genesis of the book.
What are some behaviors that you saw in yourself and in other parents that like examples of overparenting or helicoptering or other than like bringing homework in that that they forgot? Because I mean, my mom brought every lunch that I left at home, every piece of homework that I left at home. That was a part of her love language or her save the day. She did save the day.
Yeah, I totally get that. I absolutely get that because it makes us feel so good, right? Like we don't, and just to be clear, this is not like a black and white thing. Like, no, you can never take your kids' forgotten lunch to school ever. But if you know that one of their hurdles is learning how to remember their stuff, or, they've not been taking their homework to school or not been doing whatever the thing is. And that that's a particular thing that they have to come up with strategies for. And we continually take those consequences away because we're delivering it all the time, then that's going to have, they're just not going to have those opportunities to learn. But it wasn't so much that I was seeing the actions the parents were taking. I was hearing about them, but more I was seeing the consequences that those actions were having on my students. A lot of anxiety around whether or not their homework is perfect. I had a student once who was stuck. He was frozen on a test because he couldn't get question 2 right. And I was like, yeah, no big deal. Just move on to question 3 and come back to question 2. Maybe it'll occur to you somewhere in there. And he just looked up at me with these incredible big teary eyes and said, I can't. Like he just mentally, physically, emotionally couldn't move on until he got number 2 perfect. And then I had I had other students say that they just couldn't write rough drafts. It was too overwhelming for them to get the stuff out on the page. And, as a writer myself, I know I have to write some really bad stuff to get to the good stuff. But the bad stuff was so upsetting to my students that they were having a lot of trouble even taking any risks. And the problem with that is then they have issues with admitting when they don't understand something, not raising their hand, not asking for help. They don't want to be perceived as anything other than perfect or understanding everything, and not just understanding everything, but being able to get everything done and have it be effortless, that kind of thing. And that was not just impeding their ability to do the work for the learning, but their ability to, take on challenge problems. Because, you don't want to take on challenge problems because you might get some wrong and then you won't be perfect. And that's a really important part of learning. There's actually really great science around doing tasks and learning that require us to be at the very edge of our ability level and to push through and get it wrong a couple times and learn from those mistakes. And when kids can't learn from their mistakes because they're not able to see tasks through, which is part of what I talk about in The Gift of Failure, they're just not able to learn from those techniques that work really, really well for learning. So that was just really scary to see, both in my own kids and in my students.
Yeah. I mean, it's heartbreaking to me to think that, that's all adolescence is, right? It's like learning by getting dirty and getting messy and raising your hand and asking questions and not worrying about someone in your class not thinking you're perfect, but like learning group in a safe place. What do you pinpoint as the cause of that deep-seated anxiety or need to be perfect?
It comes from a lot of different places. In The Gift of Failure, I got to do, in both of my books, I get to do these sort of historical looks at parenting. And I love that stuff. Like I'm looking across at my bookshelves right now and I have like 2 full shelves on like the history of drinking in America and like all the way back to colonial. It's just really fun to do that stuff. And so these chapters at one point were like 3 times as long as they are in the final draft. But there was a lot, the kids we started having fewer kids. We started having kids at an older age and using, after having been in the workforce for a while. And then we learn all kinds of things in the workforce, like Excel spreadsheets and, checklists and graphing. And then suddenly we're graphing our children's, everything. And also needing feedback. Like I was out in the workforce before I had kids. I loved, getting feedback on my work. Am I doing a good job? I want a report card. Someone give me a report card on how I'm doing. And then we don't really get report cards of how we're parenting. And so the only place we have to look is our kids, right? And so I am super proud of my kids, and I would love to rave on air about like what my kids are doing and all the things they're accomplishing, and have that somehow reflect back to you that I must be a great parent because they're doing all of these amazing things. But the reality is I don't get to take credit for that. That's not about me. Those accomplishments and their failures have to belong to them, in the same way that I can't take credit for all of their accomplishments. I can't take the blame for all of their failures either. And so I think kids sense from us that we get great pleasure and bragging rights and, put it on Facebook. Put it on Instagram, put the report card on the refrigerator. That glow sort of reflects back on us. And they want to please us and they want to feel like they are enough. And one way to feel like you are enough is to have the right letters on your report card, to have the great SAT scores or whatever. And the problem is, as kids start to derive their identity and derive their sense of value from those things, they start to not believe us when we say things like, but what's important, it's okay that you failed at this, but what's important to me is that you learned something from it. Or, sweetie, it's okay if you don't get straight A's. I still love you the same. And I hear from kids constantly. I get to speak in a lot of schools. I give all the kids my email address and I ask them to email me, things that they want me to tell their parents when I speak to their parents, usually in the evening events, speaking events. And they tell me this all the time, that they're feeling like they're being treated not as the person they are, but as some aspirational offspring that their parents sort of wish they had. And that's really upsetting to kids. Kids want to be known and loved for who they actually are and not some other version that we've dreamed up, or, some do-over of all the place. Like, of course I wanted my kid to apply to colleges that, I thought would have been cool for me too, but this isn't about me. This is about this whole separate person. So anyway, there's a lot of what I get from kids is that they're afraid of screwing up. They're afraid of not having the perfect grades. They're afraid of not getting into the perfect college. They're afraid of not being everything that we want them to be. And therefore, that translates to their own sort of dissatisfaction with their own concerns in not being perfect.
It's so much pressure to not feel safe to fail. It's so much pressure to not feel safe to explore and to learn about yourself. I mean, we all want to know who we are. And I know that that's part of the human experience, to be like, I love being from Southern California. I love the beaches. I love, I love science. Like, I like to know who I am, but I love family and friend time and deep, meaningful conversations. And I love learning. And like, you want to know who you are. And I think it's constantly this, this discovery of being able to identify yourself and feel, have a connection to whatever that is, but to have that pressure that you're trying to fill your parents' version or of your identity and may not be exactly what you want that is a lot of pressure. I'm curious, it's funny when you talk about the report card on the wall. I will say something that I'm going to do that my dad did was, when we got report cards, we had 3 sisters. I mentioned that we never opened report cards together. It never happened in the same room ever. There was no comparison. And we'd open our report cards and he would say, "Did you try your best?" And it was a yes or a no. And kind of sort of talk about that. And he's just say, "I'm really proud of you. I'm really proud of you. Good work." And and that's crazy, right?
Yeah. Take your experience though. Now imagine you're a kid, let's say in high school right now, and you go to a school where there is a portal where your parents can log on to the portal and see every single grade point score in real time, sometimes before you see them. And they are texting you during the day. There's a level of surveillance that's happening with kids. And I'm not saying you can't use the portal. I'm not saying you shouldn't use the portal. I actually think for kids, the portal is a fantastic way for them to take charge of their own grades, point scores. One of the things, one of the things I recommend in Gift of Failure, I say, I've never used the portal as a parent. I've used it as a teacher. But that gives parents hives. So what I say is another way to do this is something similar to what your dad did, which is, okay, today's Monday. We'll look at the portal together on Friday. And in the meantime, you go talk to your teachers. You make sure there are no mistakes. You make sure, if you forgot something, that you have a chance to get it in. And then on Friday, there won't be any surprises, or hopefully there won't be any surprises. And we can sit down and talk about that together, or focus more on goals than focusing on grades. That's another thing we do a lot in our family. But increasingly, there's this moment to moment expectation that all information is going to be it's like constant updates all the time. And inadvertently, what we've created is a situation in which sometimes, a parent might find out about a grade before the kid has even had a chance to talk to their teacher about it. I think we have a lot of technology that allows us to be, in this constant update kind of situation. And I don't necessarily think that's a great thing. I think having more conversations about how kids are doing at school is a great thing. But the I'm just going to log in unilaterally and find out what's going on with my kid may not be the best approach.
Well, you said it at the beginning of the podcast, your parents furiously loved you and they trusted you implicitly. And I think that right there, when you are tracking them like mad money and you've got the GPS and the portal and all the things, it's like you're not even giving them the opportunity to share honestly with you. And in fact, I think you'd probably, especially if they're used to you coming after them about your grades or where you're at, or if that would, I just think about myself as a teenager, I'd probably be lying more.
That's interesting you say that, because I was just about to tell you that research is really clear that kids that are more heavily monitored, more controlled, kids who don't have a lot of autonomy or independence tend to lie to their parents more. And it's simply because, as you mentioned before, the whole purpose of adolescence is to become more competent so that you will be competent out there in the world as an adult. The way their adolescents' brains are wired for that. They're wired for novelty. They're wired to seek out new experiences. And sometimes that translates as risk, sometimes it doesn't. But when we are making it so that they have no control over their lives, no control over any decisions, no control over just the small details of their lives, then we create a situation in which they then will take matters into their own hands and find ways to make space. And sometimes that's by being deceptive. Whenever I talk to kids about why they're lying about dumb stuff, like you just told your parent you're at the coffee shop, but you're really at the deli, like why lie about that? And some kids are like, look, I get nothing. I get no space of my own. I don't get anything that's just mine. And so sometimes I have to lie and sort of force it to happen so that I have something that's my own. And that's incredibly important, not just in terms of, I want open communication with my kid and I don't want my kid to feel like they have to lie to me. But if you think about it, we're stunting a whole bunch of kids if we don't give them any autonomy. And we're also undermining their motivation to engage in intellectual curiosity, to engage in practicing to become, better soccer players and practicing to become better piano players and doing their homework. Motivation goes down the more we sort of try to control them with extrinsic motivators. So, for example, if you pay your kid for their math grades, they'll actually be less interested in learning math. That's not my research. This is the research of someone named Edward Deasy. We actually have 60 years of really, really good research showing that the more extrinsic motivators, the carrot and stick method that we dangle in front of our kids, grades, points, scores, money for grades, sticker charts, the threat of punishment, surveillance, all of these things are extrinsic motivators, and they actually render our kids less interested in doing the things that we actually want them to do. And the way we start to change that is by giving them more choice, giving them more autonomy, giving them more control over their lives. So that's sort of the starting place for this whole conversation.
I feel like when I think back, I did get money for goals. I did get money for grades. I think at a certain point, it really started to come in my sophomore or junior year in high school. It wasn't prior to that, but it was at this time when I feel like my dad started to get scared about college.
Yeah.
Like it really didn't matter, but he's an entrepreneur. So he's like, but hey, you happen to do a hat trick this weekend or get that, algebra grade up. There may be some money at the end of that course, and it was without being like, you have to get straight A's. He's never said that to me, it was, or you have to be perfect or whatever. That wasn't my dad. My dad got horrible grades growing up. He was the black sheep of his family in a way, because his brothers both became professionals, an attorney, an accountant. And my dad was like this flailing entrepreneur who's wildly successful now, but he had to do it on his own. I think I'm the first. So like any first child, you're sort of my poor Sebastian, he's just, I'm like, well, we'll see if this works. And if it doesn't, we'll switch it for your next brother.
Well, what's interesting is that so much of what I'm talking about with the extrinsic motivators, like people come away, I try really hard to make this clear because I don't want people to walk away like from my speaking events or whatever, or an interview thinking, oh, I can never use extrinsic motivators with kids. And that's just not true. This is not like an either or situation. There was a kid, it was so funny. I was talking about this at a school with some kids and I said to them, I'm not dumb. Take the money if your parents want to pay you for your grades, but you've got to find something in the learning that is worth it to you apart from that money. And then this kid, she was so funny. She said, I think she thought she was throwing her teachers under the bus. She said, well, what about this? There were seniors in high school, so some of them were 18. So the kids who were 18 or older, they had a competition in their school to see who could donate the most blood at this blood thing. They had blood fair, whatever, donating blood thing they had at their school. And she's like, and then whoever won got like a pizza party in their classroom. And I said, okay, well, let's break this down a little bit. Whose idea was this? Like, did the teacher say, I'll give you a pizza party to whoever delivers, donates the most blood? She said, no, actually, we came up with that. That was our idea. And I'm like, well, that's a really different thing than someone saying, if you do X, I will give you Y. This was you guys finding a way to motivate each other. Anyway, so there's no like, and even with the extrinsic motivators like sticker charts, there are exceptions to that too. If you want your kid to do something that only requires like short-term focus or, no creativity, and by the way, may happen to have its own intrinsic motivation, like potty training, like being out of diapers, being in big girl panties or big boy underpants, those are intrinsic motivations that make a sticker chart happen to work for potty training. But sticker charts in general will lose their power over time. Allowance for things, for grades, whatever, for chores around the house will lose. It will become less and less effective over time because we got to figure out a way to get kids engaged in the thing for the sake of the thing itself. And so this is not a black and white conversation. This is sure, use both things, but let's lean more on intrinsic motivation than extrinsic motivators.
I mean, I can look all the way back to times tables. My dad, at one point prior to high school, so this is obviously times tables prior to high school, I do remember him being like, you want that Game Boy? Learn your times tables. I'll get you that Game Boy. And I never got the Game Boy. Like, I wasn't at that moment interested in the Game Boy. But for some reason, I was so passionate about geometry and was nowhere near the highest in my class in high school. But in that specific subject, just floated myself to the top because I thought proofs were so cool. Yeah. And it's so interesting to think about like being an entrepreneur today, because you have to be curious about learning and growing and changing to keep your business successful. If you're not changing and growing and pushing or excited about it intrinsically, it just sort of goes away. It doesn't, it can't keep going. And this whole business is my whole business has been built out of my love and obsession of nutrition that had nothing to do with, American history or the other subjects that I had to learn in high school or in college or whatever, whatever other courses you were taking at the time. Like, I got to go so deep in that, and I just for the love of learning. And I think that is so special, to love something so much and to want to learn about it. And from your book, like my experiences, I'll know what my kids really love, and I'll be excited for them to have good grades in those subjects. And if they're asking me for help in others, like, how can I help them? But I don't know. I read your book.
It's funny because part of what you're talking about is the fact that you saw this curiosity, and specifically around entrepreneurship, modeled for you. So we can sit here and jabber about all the things that we should do and how we should, function as parents. But if we're not modeling for our kids, being curious, making mistakes. I was at a speaking event one time, and this parent raised her hand and she wanted me to come up. Her question was, can you come up? My kids don't want to read for pleasure. So can you come up with a list of challenging books that my kids will want to read? And I'm like, well, okay, first of all, I'm good at matching kids with books, but that's kind of a magic list. But so let's talk about this first. Do your kids see you read for pleasure? Do they see you prioritizing reading as something that is valuable to do? And she had to admit, no, oh, I'm busy at work or whatever. And then I asked her further, if she was to read, would she be reading like a book so her kids know what she's doing? Or is she on like an iPad so they can't really tell what she's doing? Anyway, she had to admit that no, she doesn't read for pleasure. And then I said, this is the worst part of it though. I said, if your kids were to read, what would they read for fun? And she's like, oh, well, they love those Diary of a Wimpy Kid books, but those are stupid. So I got rid of them. So I had to have a little conversation about like literacy and, the fact that you should have like 30% below your reading level, 30% at your reading level, 30%, above your reading level. And I also instructed her to apologize to her kids for getting rid of the books that they really loved. But there's all these moments where you realize like, oh, I'm telling my kids to be on their phone less and I'm completely glued to my phone. Or I'm telling them to be okay with making mistakes. And yet I never, ever talk to my kids about the mistakes I've made, or I shield them from that because I want them to think I'm perfect. That's the value in, like I talked before about goals. Every season we try to set as a family, as much as possible. My kids are partially or completely out of the house now. Once a season, we do try to sit down and set some goals for ourselves. And one of them has to be a little scary. And then when we come back in the next season, we talk about what went well and what didn't go well. And, if it didn't go well, like who cares? It's your own personal goal. So my kids have seen me really screw up. They've heard me talk about how I dealt with it. They've heard me talk about how embarrassing it was. The fact that I wanted to throw up when I found out that the first draft of The Gift of Failure, my editor referred to it as unpublishable. It was not anywhere near ready for prime time. And yet, if you ask my kids what my proudest moment as a writer is, they will not tell you about the New York Times, the fact that The Gift of Failure hit the New York Times bestseller list. I mean, that's great. That's wonderful. They will tell you, if you ask them, that it was when my second book came back with very few edits because I was determined not to make the same mistakes that I made with Gift of Failure twice. So when I got this news that The Gift of Failure it sucked in its first draft, when I got that news, I also shared that with them. And I told them how stressful that was to hear all this negative feedback. But I knew what I had to do was make all these lists of what to do, what not to do. And so when my second book happened, I had all of this prepared. Here's what to do. Here's mistakes not to make again. And my editor came back and said, you want to push up the publication date on this because it's almost ready to go. And that was me, showing my kids that I was humiliated, I was embarrassed, but at the same time, I was able to hear the feedback and incorporate it so that I became better. That to me is over and over and over again what I encourage in my kids. So I want them to tell me about the good stuff they achieve, but I also want to hear about the screw ups. And same thing with my students. I want to hear about, boy, I really screwed this up, but I learned a lot from it. That's really important stuff. Modeling. So the whole point of that whole statement was you got great modeling over making mistakes and learning from them and being curious and wanting to be better and all of these, things, these risks that you have to take in order to be, especially in entrepreneurship. It's like a risk-filled business, a risk-filled endeavor. When you share that with your kids, they learn a lot from it.
Well, I really just have to thank my dad for that, honestly. I mean, I think I was in second grade and I walked into class at show and tell and I was like, my dad lost his job. Like they were hiding things. They weren't hiding things from me.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's because they were younger parents or because it's just an open book and now I'm an open book, but in hindsight, I didn't have a lot of anxiety because when I had questions or they were talking about adult things, I was at the dinner table learning what was happening. Okay, my dad's in a lawsuit now. My dad's, he did lose his job. My mom has to go back to work. Like there were struggles that were shared with myself and my younger sisters. Instead of trying to hide those behind their bedroom doors, we were brought into the failures. And my dad did talk a lot about growing up in a house where he had to go sign himself up for baseball when he was little. His parents weren't doing it for him. It was the exact opposite of what kids today are getting, which is like major snowplow, hand holding, overparenting, helicoptering. I mean, if he wanted to play baseball, he had to go sign himself up. Like he failed class after class and ended up at Vietnam and coming back and as an adult working his way into college, so to see that modeled, like he is relentless, he is resilient. And that's an amazing example, and struggled massively, watched his mom struggle and then struggled personally with alcoholism and now is, my younger sister is 5 years younger than me. So 36 years sober.
Mm-hmm.
It's
a lot of what you're talking about is reflected in the research from a couple different perspectives. Partially, so the whole sitting down at dinner and having conversations about these things, having conversations really about anything. But if you talk to the students that talk to me about this stuff, they often will say, I really do like talking to my parents. I just don't want to talk about the things they want to talk about all the time, like my math test next Friday or whatever. But having dinner together and the things that are analogous to that, having opportunities to have unfiltered conversations, opportunities to be fully engaged, like everyone has put their technology down and this is about face-to-face conversation. Not only is that great for, making better relationships with our kids and stuff like that and earning their trust, and modeling these things for them, but it's also extremely preventative against substance use. So there's this whole body of research around family dinner being incredibly protective against substance use, but really it's the things that make family dinner or something analogous to it, like talking in the car, having some sort of family meeting once a week, anything that's really analogous to having time together to talk in an unfiltered and specifically uninterrupted way, taking the technology away and allowing kids to talk and feel heard. So there's that. And then the other thing that your dad did was bring you into these conversations and help you understand how he was making changes in order to succeed next time. That's called self-efficacy, when you take a step, take action, and you expect it to cause change. Kids with higher levels of self-efficacy have much lower levels of substance use. And giving kids a sense of self-efficacy is one of the most preventative things we can do against substance use disorder. And the other thing is that as I said before, adolescence is a time of needing to learn how to be competent. We don't necessarily have to become competent only through our own experiences. So when you were talking about your dad losing his job and having to figure out what's next, my kid, we have a family text thread, and then we have like individual text threads. Like if my kid doesn't want to burden the family with the rest of the stuff, he'll just text me. So my kid, when I was on a speaking trip once, texted me about the fact that he'd had a car accident, and it was really unfortunate because he had just stopped being on our insurance and he had turned down the insurance with the car rental company. So he was in deep doo-doo and this was going to be out of pocket expenses. And I said, can we talk about this on the family text? Because I want your sister to be a part of this conversation so that she can learn also from your mistakes. And he wasn't embarrassed by that. It's like, okay, let's switch over to that text thread. So opening up family members' mistakes so that now not only does my son know very deeply that you must be insured either through your family's insurance, your own car insurance, or the rental insurance, my daughter is not going to make that same mistake either because she watched her brother have to pay almost $1,000 out of his own pocket to remedy that situation. And it was very important that it came out of his own pocket. He felt like this was his responsibility and he needed to fix that. So he worked really, really hard to earn the money to have that happen. And I think that's more modeling. Like elder siblings can model, and younger siblings can model for elder siblings if they're having issues with something. These are all really important learning opportunities that happen within the family that we sometimes strip away because we want to look perfect, or we don't want to talk about the mistakes. We only want to talk about the successes, and that's a problem.
Right. And so how do you create the safe space on that text thread so that siblings so there isn't rivalry and competition, and it feels like you really truly give your kids the ability to have the gift of failure, truly, without shame and guilt and judgment, and only with learning?
by having that be the example in our family. Like I think modeling, my own mistakes and my husband's own mistakes. And that goes for like conversations. A lot of parents say they're really worried about being a hypocrite when they have those conversations about like substance use or whatever. And the kid comes and looks at them and says, well, did you ever use da 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 da? And, a lot of parents want to lie and say, oh, no, I was perfect. I never did those things, because they don't want their kid to think, oh, well, you did it, so therefore I can do it. And that line it's a really careful line down the middle of not romanticizing things, but still being honest about it. So like when we talk about that stuff, we talk about, for example, my husband's lost year after college, where he had no motivation, didn't want to know what he wanted to do with his life. And he was living in a house with a bunch of guys who were growing weed in the basement. So he smoked a lot of weed. And very specifically, all of that marijuana use did not help with his motivation. It didn't help him get out of his situation. He was just sort of numbing himself out so he didn't have to deal with the fact that he was freaked out. And then once that year was over, he realized, wow, I kind of messed with my short-term memory a little bit here, because the receptors for THC are right near our hippocampus, which is where our short-term memory formation happens. So that's why it messes with short-term memory. And so we talked to our kids about this. Yes, these drugs did happen. And here's why he did them, because it helped him numb out and make him not have to deal with his anxiety. But the reality was he was just pushing that mess further down the road and compounding it, frankly, and messing up his short-term memory, which he was going to need once he figured out what he wanted to do with his life and have some efficacy at work. So having these conversations with our kids, these very open conversations about like the lessons that we learn, talking about other people, the lessons other people learn in their lives, and encouraging kids when they make mistakes. So for example, there was this student that was talking to me about the fact that he was really angry because there was a flaw in an art homework assignment, an art project assignment that had been given to him in school. He realized what the flaw was. It was a flaw in the materials that had been assigned. It wasn't working. So he did some research and found a better version of maybe how that assignment should have been done, went out late at night, actually got the materials himself, didn't have a finished project by the time it was time to turn it in, but had prepared for his teacher an explanation of why these other materials may have been superior and why it didn't work with these first materials. And that teacher still failed him because he didn't have a finished project. I, as the parent, even if I don't rush in there to say to the art teacher, this is so unfair, da, 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 da. He should have gotten an A because he really wrestled with the problem. I'm going to make it very clear as a parent that what is incredibly important to me was the problem solving that went on there. If you read like Adam Grant's book, Originals, he talks over and over and over again, the people who change the world are not people who followed directions really, really well. They tend to be people who are like, okay, this is not working right. Let me see if I can solve this problem or make it better or change it for the future. So I like that. To me, that kind of problem solving is way more important to me than what that grade is on that assignment. And I'm going to make that super clear to my kids and make it really clear that that teacher, as a teacher myself, obviously, I would take that example very much to heart and make it very clear that in the future going forward, that I stress to my students that if they are really good problem solvers and they have found a flaw in my assignment, that that's going to be worth a lot too, having that conversation with me. And then showing, that I'm willing to change as a teacher, that I'm willing to change as a parent, based on the mistakes I make and the mistakes that they make and the mistakes their own teacher makes, because we all make mistakes. That's sort of how this works. And then, to answer the rest of the question, I would have not taken over and fixed that problem for my kid with their art teacher. I would have helped them rehearse a conversation about how they could have that conversation with the teacher over their art, how things went down with that art assignment. But I was so excited for that student that he had figured it out. And his parents were mad over the F, and no one saw the value in what he did, which is really unfortunate.
I mean, that's pretty heartbreaking to me, because I look at that same way you do, which is you're sharing all this research in the gift of failure of how we can parent less, but how do we parent less when our kids' future is potentially being impacted? Right. And I get, I think that's, you have to tell me. I mean, I think of that and I think well, I guess you have to have trust in your child. You have to just
Mhm.
see that they are a problem solver and that they are an original and that these grades aren't going to hold them back from their life's mission and the success
Right.
they'll reap in the real world.
Okay, well, so there's two things. What I often will talk to parents about is number one, I do think very, very slowly that colleges are changing, and I'm not saying all of them, but some colleges are really changing the way they're evaluating the applications that they get. And that's changing over time, mainly because, for example, during COVID, they couldn't do SAT and ACT scores, and they had to come up with other ways to look at a student. There's this organization called mastery.org, and there's this thing called a mastery transcript, which is another way people are going. When we moved to where we live now in Vermont, as the education journalist, I was the one in charge of sort of researching the schools and seeing where we might want to live based on what schools were doing what. And luckily, the largest district in Vermont, CVU, does this really cool thing where they have what's called the standards-based assessment model. It's a standards-based classroom. So it's not about like my kid didn't get traditional grades, which for me as a teacher is fantastic because like if I get a kid in my classroom who had, let's say, a B in English last year, I don't know what that kid knows and doesn't know. What I know is that he has a B and I have no idea what knowledge is encapsulated within that B. But if my student has a standards-based transcript, which says like, here are the skills this student achieved and has mastery of, and here are the ones that he doesn't have mastery of, then I'm able to say, oh, okay, I know this kid knows what a noun is. I know he doesn't know what a verb is. So there's a really good starting point. And likewise, when my kid would come home from school and really not have mastered something, then I can know really specifically what skills need to be built up. So that is changing over time. On the other hand, let's say that F in senior year or whatever, let's say it's junior year, the super important year when it comes to college. Let's say there's an F on the transcript in art for this assignment. Let's say an F in art overall, a nightmare scenario, right? As a teacher and as a kid, I know as a teacher, when I'm writing letters of recommendations for students for college, that kid with that story about the art project, I am going to be so excited to write his evaluation. Like if I knew that story, then that would be the starring story of like, this is a kid who is not going to take directions at face value, is not going to assume that, is not going to just follow directions, is going to have some independent thought. That's a really important thing. And let me tell you why that makes this student so fantastic. And I would hope, and I in fact told this student this, if you haven't already written your college essays, this should be your college essay. Yeah, I have this F on my transcript. Let me explain what that is about and how I gained a real sense of mastery and confidence from that. And yet how frustrating it was for me that it was not recognized as such. And that's why I want to go to this school where you really value the learning process as opposed to just playing the game of school. And that is the sort of school that this kid is drawn to because he was so frustrated by, his experience of just being expected to follow rules. And what's been really interesting is I have two very different kids, and the learning experience my kid had in a standards-based classroom allowed her to really know how she learns and what she needs from an institute of higher learning. And the questions she had for the college that ultimately she ended up choosing were, where's the mentorship going to come from? What if, I want to do this thing in an independent way or with a different trajectory, or I come up with this idea, where the opportunity is going to be for that for me. And this college that she ended up going to is very open to that kind of individualized learning. So it was great that, so I totally get the worry. Like a lot of parents leave my speaking events and they're like, yeah, but what about the SAT? Or yeah, but what about college? And my answer is usually, there are, if you look at accredited and non-accredited 2-year, 4-year, there's like 4,000 colleges to choose from out there. And yet we tend to just talk about the same 100 that are on the US News and World Report, best of list. And I would encourage you to go read a book called Colleges That Changed Lives, where kids, and to seek out places that are not just about, oh my gosh, I'm going to get to put that sticker on the back of my car and boast in the school parking lot with that sticker. In fact, that was the thing I told my kids. That was the one thing I said I would not do, was I would not put a sticker on the back of my car indicating their college choice, because the choice of where to do those 4 years of your life and where you're going to become the adult that you're going to become and the learner that you're going to become, that's more important than my ability to boast about it on the back of my car. So it was sort of symbolic act, but that was the one thing I wouldn't do. So, start thinking a little bit more in an open way about finding the school that's going to fit your kid, as opposed to attempting to get that coveted sticker on the back of your car that's yay Ivy League or whatever, because that's not a great fit for all kids.
It isn't. And I think also my dad always just said punch your ticket, because it's like sometimes you need a college degree to get your first job, but it's that track record of like your work ethic and how involved and excited you are about that job and how much you give back to that organization that sets you apart and gets you.
Well, and there's no denying that certain college names are going to open certain doors. My oldest has just got through the process of applying to PhD programs. And, the kids from the Ivy League schools probably got more acceptances than the next tier or the next tier down. On the other hand, so I went to my safety school, which was my state university. And I went there for financial reasons. I went there because it would allow me to do more things than I would have been able to do if my parents had been trying to pay for a private university. It was also really big, and I wanted lots of options. After college, I applied to an internship that I did not get with The Atlantic. I didn't even get an interview. Fast forward, so I wrote for The Atlantic for 5 years. I was at one point their most popular education writer. Like, I got more clicks for my education articles than anyone else. And all I had to do was sort of go back to that place of, you guys turned me down originally, and now I'm writing for this place. No one ever asked me what my SAT scores were. No one ever asks me where I went to college anymore. It's just not a thing. I've worked really, really hard to build up my skills and my breadth and width of skills and expertise and things. And just no one asks me where I went to college anymore. It's just not a thing. So, there are many different ways to look at this. There's also, for example, my sister, she was not a college person. She went because everyone expected her to. And when she dropped out, she's like, now can I do what I really wanted to do in the first place, which was to go become a hairstylist? And fast forward, my sister is a master colorist who travels around to train other colorists. She's like at the top of her field, and she loves what she does. And, there's just a lot of different ways to look at what is a strong career, life trajectory. And I just wish we didn't have such a narrow view of it.
Well, it's conversations like this that bring people to the point. I think if you've had some life experience, or you maybe, for the people who did go to one of those Ivy League schools or the top 100 schools, and they graduated and they got, and look at my husband. I mean, he went to UCLA for undergrad. He got in right out of high school. He's valedictorian in high school. He went to USC for law school. He got into the corporate career. He did 7 years as a corporate attorney. He used to have nightmares in our apartment. Screaming nightmares, full of anxiety about not getting his memos right for a specific. And he wouldn't even tell me about his clients, because he had the client privilege, and he would spout their names off in the middle of the night. And I'm like, who's this Mr. What? Tell me everything, and then all that rushing. I think about my little boys. I think about them growing up and being an adult body and having so much pressure to get it right when 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4 in a corporate attorney's world, and hating it and putting all this time and effort and work into building a career. And then to be like, I actually hate this. this is
Well,
horrible.
and some people might love it. Like I went to law school and never practiced. Actually, I host a podcast about writing. It's called the #AmWriting podcast. And two of my co-hosts, who are both New York Times bestselling authors as well, one used to work on Wall Street. She was a bond trader on Wall Street. And one was an attorney. She was an assistant district attorney in Manhattan. Both went to big Ivy, schools. And that just wasn't the path that made them happy. And being writers made them happy. And so they did a mid-career pivot. So, and the other thing that parents tell me a lot is, okay, I just want my kids to be happy. And at a certain point, I have to stop them and say, like, happy isn't enough. Like, happy means, oh, well, I don't get frustrated by this thing. I can avoid my kid being sad. I can avoid my kid being frustrated. I can make them happy all the time. I didn't just want my kids to be happy. That wasn't enough for my kids. My kids deserve more than that. I wanted my kids to be fulfilled, and I wanted them to be fulfilled members of our society, and to find things that really feed their soul and feed their brains and feed their heart. And that's about more than just happy. And, I made a lot of these mistakes originally with my kids. And you read my book, I had a 9-year-old child who could not tie her own shoes because I did it for her for so long and taught her to feel like she couldn't do it. I taught her to feel like she was incompetent because it was just faster. It was easier if I did it for her. And that replicated in lots of other things as well. And I was raising a kid who just didn't feel like she was capable of anything because I was doing it all for her. And I had a lot of saying, I'm sorry, and helping her find out that she actually is really capable. And I had a lot of undoing to do after I spent a lot of time just trying to make my kids be happy.
And so, I can't recommend your book enough. I'm obviously
thank you. You're so sweet.
But you talk about dependent parenting versus independent parenting, and you just touched on it. So what are best practices when it comes to teaching your kids that they're capable and parenting for independence?
Yeah. So again, trying to get our kids to be intrinsically motivated requires us to give them a little bit more autonomy, which is control. It's control over the details of their lives. Like, why are you so hell-bent on them keeping their room a certain way? Because there's no research to show that if a kid is really neat in their childhood, that they're going to be neat as adults. I was a slob as a child. So was my sister. We're both incredibly neat adults. So let them have their room be the place that they get to be and do and act the way they want. Give them a little bit more autonomy, help them feel competent, not just confident, help them actually gain skills, things that can't be taken away from you. Like, confidence is easily burst. You tell your kid how smart and talented and wonderful they are all the time, and then they suddenly fail a test, and they're like, oh my gosh, my mom's wrong. But competent, like actually having skills, like knowing how to change a tire and being able to call people and ask for things on the phone and make appointments and fill out forms and all those skills, you can't take, once you know how to do something like that, you can't take it away. And also having really good connection with your kid. And that's going to require actually good open communication, non-judgmental, that kind of thing. And then from my perspective, the things that I still struggle with are, I have to think more long-term. I can't think in terms of like this emergency right here in front of us, like this forgotten homework, this screwed up, whatever it was my kid was supposed to do. I have to think in terms of, do I want them to be able to do it perfectly right now? Or do I want them to be able to do it themselves without prompting in a month, 6 months, a year, 5 years? So that long-term view of parenting has been sort of key for me. Like, when I want to rush in and fix it for them, having that moment to breathe and say, oh, no, if they don't learn how to fix it themselves, they won't know how to do it themselves next time. I can give them guidance, but I can't step in and do it for them. And then, frankly, the last thing is that I have to love the kids I have and not just the kids I wish I had. We have all these images of who our kids are, that they're going to undo, they're going to succeed where we failed, or they won't be bullied where we were bullied, or they'll be smarter, prettier, better, more talented, whatever. they're not my do-over. My kids are their own individual human beings who have their own wants and needs and hopes and goals. And it's only by knowing what those hopes and goals are that we get any leverage over helping our kids, work towards those goals and teaching our kids how to make lots of have small goals up to their bigger goals, that kind of thing. So thinking more long-term, loving my kid for who they are and not just who I wish they were, those are the two things that I sort of are constantly, it's that constant reminder in the back of my head. And my kids are big now, but for a while there, it was an hourly thing. No, don't. Just step back, let her try to do it herself first so that she can figure it out for herself. Sit here while she agonizes over that phone call that she really doesn't want to make. Coach her with it. There was this moment one time when we were in a hotel and she was scared. I was doing work and I had to go do a talk. So I left her behind in the hotel. She was at an age where she was just still really scared of interacting with adults. And I explained to her how to call room service and order breakfast when she woke up. And I came back that day and found literally a step-by-step checklist she had made for herself. Like, say your name, say what room you're in, order this thing, say thank you. Remember, mom left $5 right there. That's the tip. That I'll sign that piece of paper. And she was just so proud of herself for figuring it out. And, for me, it's the rewards that I get from like the moment where she unthinkingly picks up the phone and calls someone to ask for something. I'm like, oh man, that is a big reward for a long struggle we had for many years. And I'm so grateful that I didn't take over then so that she can do this now.
And she's so proud of herself and and she has a history of doing it and maybe, forgetting to tell them the room number one time, being embarrassed and wanting to hang up, but it's the uncomfortable situations that we get through that give us the confidence because we have the competence. The confidence without the practice and the failing, the messiness is empty and easily.
And now we're back to that self-efficacy thing because you're like, oh yeah, I can do that because I did this thing that was kind of like it. And I have this transferable skill over here. Yeah, I can probably figure that out for myself. That's self-efficacy. And those are the kids who go on to, really feel like they can take on the world and figure things out and not necessarily like never ask for help or never get support. That's not what this is about. This is about kids who at least feel like they have the ability to change a bad situation if they're in it, like to change their own life, to change the world around them. And it's kids with a really low level of self-efficacy, either because they've had no control over their lives. I used to teach a lot of kids like in the foster care system, in group homes that had no control over their lives, or kids who had every advantage and yet everything was controlled for them and done for them and executed for them. And they never picked their own classes and all that sort of stuff. Those kids often have really low levels of self-efficacy as well. And often my classroom at the rehab was made up of both of those kids, both kids who just felt like, why bother? No matter what I do, my life won't change. I can't affect change. So why should I not use drugs? Why should I not stay sober? Or why should I stay sober at all? Why bother? So that building up that self-efficacy is so important for so many reasons.
So what can we actively do in the home to like flex this muscle as parents?
Yeah.
Your kid may
just pick. Yeah, honestly, the homeschool communication and doing, like, for example, homework is a really easy place to start. If you've been like sitting down with your kid right with them and like walking them through it little by little and being right on top of them, you've been the main conduit of homeschool communications and it's time for them to sort of step up, say, what, sweetie, I realized I think I've been doing too much for you. And I think you can do a lot of things that I didn't even think you could do. I've been thinking about it and you're way more competent than I've given you credit for. And so I'm going to let you have more control. And then what's really nice is I often advise parents to go to the kids' teachers. And I would do this too. I would get in touch with the teachers and I'd say, look, I'm not going to be hovering. I'm not going to be checking the portal 24/7. I'm not going to be looking over my kid's shoulder when they do homework. So here's the best way to get in touch with me. I trust you to do your job and hold my kid to the consequences that need to be held to. And let's do this together because we're kind of a team. And our shared desire is that my kid learn. And so that's been sort of my MO as a parent / teacher. And frankly, most teachers will just want to hug you when they hear that you're trying to help your kid become more competent and not just get perfect answers on everything. So, and then if your kid screws up, there is a honeymoon period, and then your kid screws up, guide them once they've, screwed up, help them come up with strategies, help them come up with things that might work. And in The Gift of Failure, I talked very specifically about the strategy my daughter came up with when she was forgetting her homework constantly. That strategy she came up with the day I didn't take her homework to school for her. And she had one of those talks with her teacher who was like, look, something's got to change. You have to come up with a strategy. This has been going on for too long. And she came up with a method that worked for her. And it is the method she still uses. She's been using it since 4th grade. And I know she uses it because she makes checklists for herself. And I have about 15 of them that I've saved because she makes a new one for each new school year and all that kind of stuff. And she continues to use them. And I don't think that strategy would have worked for her if it hadn't been the one that she'd had to come up with on her own in that moment where someone really pushed her with consequences.
She's taking ownership, and it's paid off big time in her adult life now.
Yeah. And talking to her about the homework thing, like, is it that you're not doing your homework? Is it that, and it turns out she was doing her homework the whole time. She just wasn't turning it in, or it wasn't making it into her backpack. So it was an organizational issue and a remembering to turn it in thing. But if I had not had that conversation with her, I would have just assumed she was never, ever doing her homework. And we never could have come up with, the right strategy and help coach her into a strategy that worked for her.
Well, it was interesting reading your book, especially because you were talking about being a teacher, and just, I can imagine the worst part of a teacher's job, or I know for my husband, who's the coach, the baseball coach and the soccer coach so far, is the kids aren't the problem. It tends to be like parents who, well-meaning, and I'm sure I'm going to way. I'm going to feel fiery because that you just want to be so protective of your kids, but get overly involved. And what your book taught me was to say, like, hold on a second. You don't need to come out with a shiv here for your kid. Take a minute. Yeah. And how can you coach them to stand up for themselves or to have open communication with their teacher or their coach without undermining their teacher, their coach, the ref. Yeah. People that are volunteering, we'll even say teachers sometimes are volunteering because they should be paid 3 times as much as they're paid to support them to do their job.
Right. Yeah, I was speaking in a community recently in Massachusetts where there were signs on a whole bunch of lawns that said, coaches are volunteers, please be kind to them. And something went down in that community that people had to make yard signs, reminding people to be nice to coaches. And in The Gift of Failure, there's a survey result from this guy who worked with high-level athletes, and he talked to them. He asked them what their favorite part about youth sports was, what their very favorite part was, and what their least favorite part of youth sports was. And their least favorite part of youth sports, and this is so sad to me, was the ride home in the car with their parents after like the big game, was their least favorite part of youth sports. And their favorite part of youth sports is when their grandparents would come to watch them play, because their grandparents were there, mostly for the joy of it. And it's hard to walk that line between, supporting, guiding, knowing you can do it better than they can or more quickly than they can, but helping them get to a place where they can do it themselves and that they have that sense of self-efficacy. They have that sense of intrinsic motivation to learn and become and all that sort of stuff. But that's our challenge. We have to think about what makes us great parents, and the things that make us feel like great parents are when our kids are able to do the stuff on their own, that we used to have to do for them, because our job is to put ourselves out of a job, right? To make it so that they don't need us anymore. And that's the scariest and most devastating thing I've ever heard. But, I have a 25-year-old kid who still calls me for advice because he trusts me. I hope he trusts me to know, to not be judgmental and to not want to fix it for him, but to just hear him out. Because often that's all they want from us. Sometimes I'll say to my kids, do you want me to give you advice, or do you just want me to listen? And sometimes what they say is, no, I really just want you to listen first. And we'll get to the, maybe I want advice, but right now I just need you to listen. I don't want you to fix things for me. I just want you to hear me. And, Lisa D'Amour talks about that a lot too. She's, a fantastic resource. And often she talks about this all the time in all of her books. I think she talks about this, the need to just be the sounding board sometimes and not the fixer.
It's goals that my boys would call me when they're 25 years old to be like, hey, Mom, just want to let you know what's going on. Can you be the sounding board, or even maybe give me advice? But that would mean if in 20 years, if Sebastian called me like that I would feel so good in your shoes. Like I would feel so proud of myself that they feel safe enough and that there is going to be no judgment and that they're, that I'm just there for them. Like I did have a moment where Sebastian said something that wasn't so kind to a kid in our car that we were carpooling home, like just out of the blue, just like random crappy comment. And I was,
because they do that. They just do that sometimes.
He's a nice kid, and I was mortified. Right. But I was like, okay, let's talk this through. Like, Notice just said this, like, why'd you feel? And part of me was like, let's just pretend that didn't happen. I was like, Bud, you gotta own that 100%. And he's like, well, I said that because of this. And it was like kind of an excuse. And I was like, no, you gotta either do a voice note or a video apologizing. And I'm going to text it to his mom. And
that's a fantastic opportunity to talk about, what we know as pro-social behavior and empathy and perspective taking. Like, so how would you feel if, and then, and pick whatever the insult is that hits at that soft underbelly, vulnerable place. How would you feel if your friend suddenly turned to you without any, warning and said this thing about you? How would that make you feel? And kids don't naturally do, some kids are more natural in their empathy and perspective taking than others, but that's learning that social emotional learning stuff. That's like the real work of teaching and parenting, is helping kids advance their pro-social behaviors, which is behaviors that help us interact with other people and be able to get along with other people. So that's an amazing opportunity to yay, those mistakes happen. Yay, you heard it. The opportunity to learn how to give a good apology, not one of those, I'm sorry, but, those kind of things, or I'm sorry you feel bad that I said that thing, that kind of stuff. These are amazing opportunities, and view them as that. Don't necessarily view them as the end of the world. They're great opportunities to learn how to be better. And then you can model the same thing for your kids. You know what, sweetie? I said something to a friend of mine and she took it the wrong way, but then I realized that I could have phrased it better, and I need to figure out how to say I'm sorry and make this right, because this is a friendship that I really value. So when they hear and see us do that, they'll realize more and more how important that is in their lives too. So you're doing great, Mama.
Well, it's because of people like you and I don't know. I might think about Tina Bryson or Becky Kennedy.
I was just kidding. That's so funny. I was about to say people like Tina Payne Bryson, who teach us that, kids have to, know how to talk about their emotions in order to deal with their emotions. And she's just an incredible resource. And by the way, I have read part of a book that is coming out next year that people haven't seen yet, and it is so good. It is so good, and I'm so excited for people to get more of Tina Payne Bryson, because you should have a lot of Tina Payne Bryson in your world.
Yes, you should. She is the originals for sure.
She's great. Yeah.
Anyways, it's because of these type of conversations and your book and books like yours that I went it's okay. You just need to repair. What happened. And we all say stuff we don't mean.
Give them grace, give ourselves grace. This is a huge learning this whole parenting thing. We do not get this right the first time around. And, we do not get it right every single day. So, yeah.
Oh, It brings me
Yeah.
to my knees. That's why
you can talk to my eldest. You can talk to my younger kid about the different rules we had around substances in the home, like a sip of alcohol here and there, or having your own beer. We had one kid before I knew what I know from writing The Addiction Inoculation, and now we have a whole other different set of rules for my younger kid based on what I learned from that book. And yeah, to a certain point, she's like, "It's not fair," and I'm like, "Well, it's all I could ever ask for from you. I did the best I could based on the information I had and what I thought was right. I learned how to do differently based on better information. And now I've changed what we do. And if I were to do anything else other than follow these best practices, I would be cheating you. I would be saying, yeah, I know what's best, but this is easier for me. I just want to be the fun parent." So anyway, that happens all over the place. And the more they see us, trying to do better with new information, the more they'll hopefully get to do the same thing themselves, learn how to do the same thing themselves.
Know better, you do better. I'm going to have you back to talk about your next book. I have to go read it
Cool.
first.
Cool. I will send you a copy. You tell me where to drop it in the mail and I will get it in the mail tomorrow.
Oh my goodness. Jessica, thank you so much for all of your work in writing both of these books. Specifically for me, I will get to the next one, but The Gift of Failure just reminded me of all of the reasons why I need to let go, parent less, and give all of my boys more independence, more responsibility, let them take ownership. I'm going to remember goals over grades, connection over direction, all of the teachings you have in your book, and mostly also give the teachers and coaches and the other people that spend so much time and giving their heart to my children to show them trust and love.
Yeah.
So my kid can also step up to the plate of being the communicator with those people as well. So
absolutely. And they're not always going to have the best teachers, the best coaches, but the more empowered they feel to step up and tell adults, especially, what they need and want and deserve, then we're going a long way to making sure our kids, have that self-efficacy and don't end up being bullied themselves, feel empowered, and are less likely to be victimized.
Oh, Jessica, thank you so much. Where can people buy your books? Where can they follow along? Where can they listen to your podcast? Take us for all of your
You can find everything at jessicalahey.com. And in fact, I was realizing, so if you go to jessicalahey.com, there's a little menu item that says videos. And for a while there, and I'm probably going to go back to it, I was making daily 90-second like Instagram reel videos. But at my website, they are indexed by topic. So there's like 200 of them about preventing substance use in kids. And I'm constantly adding new content. I have a study sitting right here that I'm going to be making a video about probably this evening. And then there's about 150, 175 gift of failure videos there as well. Little bite-sized portions of, advice about all kinds of stuff that you may run up against. So you can check those videos out at jessicalahey.com as well.
Well, I know how hard it is to make content. So I appreciate you doing that and then making a place for people to go back and look and search for what they need. It makes a huge difference. And for a content creator on the side, my side hustle, I appreciate you putting those into bite-sized pieces, because sometimes that's all people have time for. So I'll send them to your website.
Good. Excellent.
And if you guys have Audible too, it's on Audible.
I got to read both of my books, which was so exciting because I am a massive audiobook fan. And so when I found out there was even a chance they'd let me read my own audiobook, I got right to work on getting better at doing that, because it was something that was really important to me.
Well, it for someone who loves audiobooks myself, it was great to listen to your voice.
Cool.
All right.
Excellent.
Well, thank you for being here, for your time. Have a wonderful evening.